Hello and welcome back to the Nutrition and Life podcast. My name is Lisa, I'm your host, and today I have the pleasure of speaking with fat loss and mindset coach and the host of the Dieting from the Inside Out podcast, Jared Hamilton. Jared, welcome to the show.
What's up? I appreciate you having me.
Well, it's my absolute pleasure, and I'm excited to talk about all things mindset and self-sabotage and all these kinds of things. But before we do, I'd love to hear a little bit more about you and how you got to where you are today in terms of your own training, but also in terms of your coaching.
Yeah, so it's I'll give you the short version. I've been in the space for a hot minute. I've been coaching and in the space for like 13 or 14 years at the time of recording this. So I started off as a personal trainer in a gym. I thought I would never not be a personal trainer. I ended up building my own thing and then did that for several years, probably like 6-ish years. And then I ended up wanting to start to get online before it was like really trendy to get online. This is like pre-COVID, pre-everything. So but right out the gate, I hired a mentor to show me like how to transition my in-person training business online. And so I started to do that, started to create content. Then I started to get a decent following on like Instagram and then started the podcast. And that's when I started to do all that stuff. But for the longest time, I was what you would just call the sustainable fat loss guy, where it was nothing really deep, very much teaching people how to eat their favorite foods and not be a psycho around working out and things like that. But ever since my early 20s, and I'm 33 right now, ever since my early 20s, I was obsessed with psychology and personal development and like how the mind and the human condition works, if you will. And so I started just studying all that stuff, not having any intention to do anything in coaching with it or the business, just strictly like just so I could just understand that stuff more. And so I did the sustainable fat loss thing for a long time, and that's where most people were you would like know me from. And then that's when I could tell something was a little bit off internally, and I wasn't quite super happy with the business and coaching and all these things. But mind you, I never really did anything with the inner game stuff and the mindset and psychology piece. But I noticed I started to see a pattern, right? Like so, for example, I would have clients come in who were just your normal fat loss Mrs. Jones client, but I couldn't do what I wanted to do with her as far as like the fat loss stuff because her inner game was messed up. So I'm like ready to go into fat loss, but like she was binge eating because she didn't know how to handle her emotions. So I go, oh no, okay, I've got to fix her emotional eating. Then I can get her on the fast track of fat loss. Cool, and I did that. But then the next client would come through the ecosystem, and then things are going really well. But then they start self sabotaging because of their identity and belief system. So I go, oh no, all right, I have to redo their identity. I have to like change their state and fix their inner game. Then I can get them on the fast track to fat loss. So then I noticed this was a very common thing. Like everyone I worked with, I had to do this like underlying inner work with them to fix some deeper stuff before I could even make fat loss work on the surface. So from then, that's when it hit me. I go, oh, this is mainstream. And this was really the stuff that I like to teach about. So that's when I decided to bring both these worlds together, sustainable fat loss, inner game transformation, and created what I now call dieting from the inside out. And that's kind of like my little history, if you will.
I love it, absolutely. And it's so funny how we go through these transitions as coaches as well, where we're like, oh, this doesn't work without that. And wow, it's
Mm-hmm.
somehow all connected. And like I started off wanting to just be an online personal trainer and not really wanting to focus too much on the nutrition aspect. And at some point I was like, well, people are not really going to get anywhere if they don't address both. So yeah,
Right.
we go through our own little journeys. But one thing that stood out to me straight from what you were saying is that basically right out of the gate, you hired a mentor to help
Yep.
you. So in your opinion, where is the value in having mentors and coaches for literally everybody, I guess?
I mean, literally, like I practice what I preach. Like I spend the most amount of my money, like historically, on coaches. I very rarely ever don't have a coach in some area that I'm looking to expand in. Cause like at the end of the day, like I can always make more money. I can't get my time back. And from the past, like I said, I've been doing this for like 13 years. My time having a coach has like exponentially increased my results by decades. I know it. Otherwise I would just be still trying to figure this stuff out on my own. It's added stress and anxiety and failure for most people on themselves. So for me, it's everything. But also as a coach, I need to practice what I preach and hire my own coaches. So whether that be in the form of a business coach, my own fitness coaches, therapists, it doesn't matter. Like whatever the thing is I'm trying to scale in, I always have several coaches behind me somewhere. So.
I think that's really great. Well, number one, that you're trying to demonstrate and practice what you preach, and number two, just that whole notion of it being a fast track, because it's so true. Like, of course, you can Google everything. People probably don't even need us as a nutrition coach. Google where should my macros be? Why am I self-sabotaging or whatever? But in the end, it is the individualized approach where we're receiving that guidance, and yeah, just having someone there to like take the thinking work out of all the equations for us.
Well, it's more than information. Like I had someone the other day ask me, they go, Jared, with the amount of content you put out for free, why should I hire you? I go, well, you tell me, why should you? If it's information you need, it's out there. Like right. If all you need is information, you don't need to hire a coach. But the problem is most people think more information equates to more success, when in reality it's there's a difference between knowing and doing. Because you want to go along the lines of self-sabotage, is the doing is caught up in your subconscious, which is your emotional mind, which is on autopilot 90% of the day. So this is why people say, oh, I research everything, I know it all, I just can't get to where I want to be. Well, it's because knowing isn't the problem. More information doesn't always equate to more execution. That's why when it comes to coaching, the way that I view it, like to answer that person's question, I say, look, the only reason one person should hire a coach is if you struggle with implementation of the information, or you struggle with accountability and showing up in those actions.
Mhm.
Because I literally just had right before this, I had an onboard call with a new client of mine who she was having Chat GPT write her workouts. But the problem was, she goes, but I've been trying this for the last 3 years and I don't have results. I literally can't, I'm not making progress and I don't know what my issue is. I do everything. Exactly. Which means something's wrong, something's off if you're doing everything, but we're not reaping the benefits. So that's when an expert comes in to fix all the problems and show how to implement and hold accountability and all those things.
Yeah, that's wonderful. I couldn't have put it any better. And I think like especially nowadays, we really see that the information is not what we're lacking most of the time. It is the execution and also the individualization, which a coach helps us with. But I'm curious, like in all your 13 years and like now with your podcast and stuff, what is some of the main ways that you see people struggle with their food? Like, is there like a red line throughout all of this where you're like, well, it stems down to X?
Yeah, there's a few things. When like you're referring to like the relationship with food. Yeah. So when it comes to the relationship with food, there's a few pillars to it. There's your beliefs around food. Like if someone believes carbs actually store fat or sugar is bad or whatever, like it doesn't matter what the plan is. If your beliefs are around something are bad, your relationship with it is going to be bad. To make it simple, I always equate your relationship with food is very similar to your relationship with another person. So imagine, like Elisa, imagine it if you just heard through the grapevine that I was a horrible person. It doesn't matter how I show up to the call. Your beliefs about me, your biases about me would have ruined things out the gate. If you're like, yeah, this Jared guy is a horrendous human being, like don't have him on your podcast. We wouldn't have got here because your beliefs would have superseded your actions. But it's the same thing with food. If you believe certain foods are good, bad, fat burning, fat storing, cheat, guilt free, and you have all these beliefs around food, of course you're going to be uncontrolled. Of course you're going to restrict and then binge. Of course you're going to have food noise mentally. So the first part is your beliefs around food, because again, in so many situations, our actions come from my beliefs. If I believe brownies are bad, I will avoid brownies and then binge on the brownies, like the average person going through this game. So your beliefs around food are the big one. Because then we can get to your actions around food is the next one. Because that's what really ties things to the mind and how our subconscious works. Is it's what you do over and over again. For example, people tell me all the time, they go, Jared, I know cookies aren't bad, but I still struggle with my relationship with cookies, but I do everything that you say. I know they're not bad. I quit using bad language. And I go, so how often do you actually have cookies? They go, oh, I can't tell you the last time. Well, if I had an issue with my wife and I avoid talking to her, well, of course we're going to have problems. Right. But so at the end of the day, it's the two biggest ones. Like we could go like down the rabbit hole with this, but the two biggest things with your relationship with food are your beliefs around the food. of these things, and then your actions around it. Because, for example, it's why restriction is one of the biggest reasons for binge eating on the food. Or if you have lots of food noise, it's because you've been craving that food all week and you haven't allowed yourself to have it, or you feel like you can't eat it in moderation, or you, once I start, I can't stop. If there's any of that going on, which is a belief, once I have one cookie, I can't not eat the whole pack. That's going to affect our actions, but then your actions is what really solidifies your belief around the thing, around the food. Because if the only time you ever eat the food, you binge and gorge yourself on it and then feel guilty, and then you have all this mental food noise and start over Monday, you're not going to have a good relationship with food. So we have to start fixing your actual deep rooted beliefs around food, where they came from, whose voice is that, what are the true beliefs around the foods, as well as your actions around the food. How are you, like, this can be the words you say, how much you incorporate it into your routine, where it's at in conjunction with your plan, and how we can strategically put it into your plan to heal the relationship you have with food.
Yeah, that's wonderful. And I think it's so interesting how our beliefs around food often also turn into self-fulfilling prophecies. Like you mentioned, like if someone says, "Oh, I can never have cookies at home because when I do, I need to eat them all." That's actually something I hear really quite frequently. Like if I have some of that, I need to eat the whole thing, or I have to have the whole thing. I can't just have one. And it's essentially a permission that we're giving to ourselves of like, hey, you can have that, or
Mm-hmm.
that's just how it's going to happen. And I
Right.
think that's really interesting how that then also affects our physiology, how we are absorbing, like to go back to your point of like the fearing of the carbs. If you are terrified of carbs and then you eat carbs the next day, you're going to be even more sensitive to how much water you're retaining, or how fluffy you're feeling, or maybe it's all such an interplay. So I find that super interesting. And so you mentioned one strategy would be to start implementing those things in small portions on a regular basis. What would be another strategy to go about that?
Well, so that's the biggest one is if you do not, if you have a current bad behavior around food that turns into a pattern, right? Is like I said, if every time you have one cookie, you eat the whole pack of Oreos, that's a pattern. If every time you eat, let's say overeat, I don't know, like cookies, or I'm sorry, let's say donuts, you say fuck it and start over Monday. Well, that's a pattern. So we have to stop the pattern first. And well, one, we have to realize you're in the pattern. Like, oh, this is what I do every single time. It's almost like when a person gets nervous, they start talking really fast and saying all the time. Like, well, that's a pattern. But you cannot escape a jail you don't know you're trapped in. So number one is realize you're in a pattern. This is your pattern. It's what you do on autopilot, left to your own devices. But then number two is we have to start incorporating these foods into your plan. The way I teach, I do it daily with my people who struggle with this. When someone comes to me and they have a horrible relationship with food, that is the very first thing I fix. Because at the end of the day, it doesn't matter what cool fat loss magic tricks I have up my sleeve if they're going to binge eat and fall off and have food guilt all day. So the biggest one is how can we get you to eat these foods frequently in moderation, and then get results at the same time, because that's when it really flips a switch in your brain. Because a lot of times most people are going to have these deep rooted beliefs around these foods, I'm uncontrolled, these foods I cannot lose weight with, these foods are bad. Well, if I can show you how to have these foods even daily in moderation inside your cohesive plan and lose weight, your brain will literally go, I get it. Because you can't feel guilty because you made progress. Well, I feel like I shouldn't be eating them, but you lost weight. There's a lot of irrefutable proof that goes against those old belief systems about them being bad. They store fat. So that's why one of my first things to do is I start working with people on how to eat these in moderation every day, where it's not as big of a deal. Because the other thing it does too is it's not special anymore. If every time you have cookies, you eat them only once a month, and when you do, you binge your face off of on them, it's going to be like, if your husband brings you flowers, it's like, oh, this is special. But if your husband brought you flowers every single day, it's no longer special. It's why we don't think anything of running water or food in our fridge or our TV working, because it's not special. But like growing up, I had certain family members, they were only allowed to watch TV once a week on Friday nights. So it was this big thing. So they look forward to it. It was this big thing and they binge watched it. But we have TVs every day now and we don't think anything of it. It's the same thing with these foods, because so many of the issues around food has to do with inherent FOMO, or fear of missing out, or lack mentality, where like, oh, I'm on this diet, I can't have chocolate. So then, oh, I messed up. I had chocolate. Let me get it out of my system because I know I'm going to go back to not having chocolate starting Monday. Because when we bring abundance into all of this and no rigid diet rules or extremes, or anything like that, it makes this game a lot simpler. But that's us overhauling a lot. everything from the way the plan is set up, the how you're approaching these foods, your beliefs around them, and integrating them in your life. Because again, if you still enable the old restricted behaviors, you're not going to find freedom. We can only find what we enable.
Yeah, that's so funny. I was actually thinking of an example where, like, if I had to eat cookies every day, and it's not like I like cookies, don't get me wrong, but I would be like, oh, can I just have like chocolate one day? Or like, it
Mm-hmm.
does get boring at some point. You're like, "Well, all right, well, it's
Mm-hmm.
the specialness out of it," and that's really something great in the at this stage.
Yeah, it works every time.
That's awesome. And so when people start making progress, I'm sure that at some point, or sometimes you also see it, at least I see it in my clients and also within myself, that sometimes there are occasions where we self-sabotage. We make progress and then something self happens and we see it as an excuse or something. Yeah, I don't know. But do you see that within your clients, and then how do you go about that and learning from that self-sabotage?
Yeah, so self-sabotage is like needs a master class on its own. Self-sabotage is really, really deep, but for this context, there's a couple things when it comes to sabotage. Sabotage usually always comes out of congruence with your beliefs again. Because as a whole, for everyone listening, your behaviors most of the day are subconscious, as in you don't realize you're doing them. Like I did not realize I was talking with my hands just now, but it's just what I do, right? So there's part of it what comes down to belief systems. So for example, if you believe that losing weight is going to be hard, well, you'll lose weight, but your brain only sees it's plausible with things being hard. So you're going to find the hardest way possible to lose weight. Or if you believe, oh, I'm a binger, it's not just what I do, it's who I am. I've always binge eaten. So you're going to find you'll do good for a couple of weeks, but then something random will start to happen. And it's not random. It's calculated, but it's because you have this identity of, oh, I'm a binger. It's a belief system, and then you'll find it happens in reality because it goes back to the own personal biasing. Because your brain, you have to understand this, guys, your brain has specific processes. Like you have this organ in your brain called your RAS, or your reticular activating system, where it's your filter on life. So if I believe, let's say I'm too old, or I'm too far gone, or my metabolism's slow, or I'm a lost cause, I shouldn't even try, my brain is going to unconsciously find evidence to support all of those things, whether it's true or not. So this is why you have to be careful. Well, the reason so many people sabotage is because it's in congruence with their beliefs. If you believe you're not good enough or worthy of your results, of course, when you start to get results, that's death to that old belief. So you're going to subconsciously sabotage it. It works like clockwork, because you'll also notice this happens anywhere else in your life. If you believe, like let's say you're like, oh, we're just broke people financially, you'll get money, but then all of a sudden, like the car transmission goes out, or that big tax bill that you didn't realize hit, or whatever, or even in dating, oh, all men are pigs, or all women just want you for your money, or whatever the belief is, you'll have something great in your life, but you'll find a way to subconsciously push it away because it goes down to what your belief is. Because you have to understand, guys, the story you replay in your head over and over again in your belief systems are very similar to the thermostat on a wall. A thermostat's role is to regulate the room temperature to what it's set at. So if my room temperature is set at 70 degrees and I leave the door open on a sunny day and the room heats up to 80, my thermostat will kick on to cool the environment back off to where it's set at. So if your mental setting is, I'm fat, I suck, I'm a binger, it's too late for me, and all of a sudden you start, let's say, following Lisa's program and you're getting results, your metaphorical room is heating up. Well, now something has to happen because now your mental thermostat turned on, life getting busy, getting tight on money, holidays coming up. And the hard part is it all seems legitimate, but it's just part of the program. So that's the first part. It goes down to your belief systems. Then the other piece of sabotage is your subconscious pattern as a whole that's been running on autopilot. What I mean by this is, for example, when I was in the fourth grade, I got glasses, right? Like just like normal glasses. But in eighth grade, I got contacts. Well, when I switched to my contacts, I did not stop sliding my finger up my nose to push my glasses up, right? If you've ever had glasses, like you put your finger on the middle of them and slide them up your face. Just because I switched to contacts doesn't mean it took me a while to break that habit of pushing my finger up my nose, even though there were no glasses there. It's because it is an ingrained physical pattern. It's a habit. But we have physical patterns and habits, we have emotional patterns and habits, and we have like all these different levels of them. It's why, like, for example, like if you crossed your arms, like I cross my arms right over left, I've always done it. Me crossing my arms left over right feels really awkward. So if I wanted to change the pattern and go left over right, it's going to be a long time before that feels normal because the amount of reps I have right over left. It's no different with your patterns. If every time you've lost weight, I'm sorry, every time you've hopped on a diet, you've lost motivation within 3 weeks, guess what's going to happen this go around? You're going to lose motivation in 3 weeks because that's what always happened. Why would it stop? Just because I'm here, or Lisa's here, or whatever is here, it doesn't mean it's going to stop. So the solution is to be anticipate it, understand that it's a pattern, it doesn't mean anything. Number two, we need to create a strategy around when it happens, not if, when it happens. And then three, execute the plan when it's here. And if you fall on your face, get back up immediately. This is what I actually have in my program. I call this the stopping sabotage method, whereas you have to step one, recognize the pattern and realize what happens on autopilot. Step two, you have to then create little strategies and plans and frameworks for when that happens again.
Mm.
And step three, implement them when they're here. Don't just go on autopilot and be ignorant to it all. And then four, when you do fall off, because you're not perfect and it will, we get back up and course correct again. Lather, rinse, repeat. So that's part of how this game works.
Well, Jared, I love these steps, but I also love your metaphors, especially the one with the glasses, as you heard, made me laugh. But it paints a picture for everybody, and we all do
Mm-hmm.
that. As you said, like you come home after a busy day, and perhaps your first physiological response is turning right into the kitchen, opening the fridge. Maybe that's a pattern. Who knows? Or maybe
Mm-hmm.
you turn on the TV and you want to sit on your one specific spot on the couch, and in that spot, you always eat your popcorn. Always, 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 always. So even just like little things like just changing over to
Mm-hmm.
the stool instead of the couch, like it honestly
Mm-hmm.
sounds so dumb, but it can make a difference. But I'm really curious into the first thing that you mentioned about self-sabotage. So when we want to bring our self-belief and our identity is also something you spoke about. Um, in line with what we're now trying to do and away from what we have been doing or believing. How do we go about that? Because that seems even trickier than changing the physiological habit of whatever you were saying.
Mm-hmm. It totally is. So I'll put it this way. My one superpower is I do my best to make everything simple as like childlike simple. I struggled with learning growing up and all this stuff. So I think that's why that's my little superpower is because I struggled with this just as much as everyone else did, or everyone else does. So here's the thing with identity work. It's really simple. What do I want? Who do I have to become to get that? Then align all my actions to that version of myself. So to break that down, what do I want? I want to lose 30 pounds or whatever the goal is you have in mind, whoever's listening to this. I want to lose 30 pounds. Well, the problem is the version of yourself here right now got you where you're at. So we have to become someone new, a newer version of yourself if you want new results, right? It's the same reason why if you're dating someone who is a notorious philanderer and they go, oh, I've changed, and they can't tell you how they've changed, they probably haven't changed because they're the same version of themselves. So you have to go, cool. What do I want? I want to lose, let's say 30 pounds. Great. Who do you have to become to who loses 30 pounds? Because the way I put it, if you're watching the video, holding my hands up, is if you're down here, your current state is lower level because you're unhappy with the results. And you want a higher level results. But it's like a radio frequency. If I'm at 90.5, that's let's say country music. But if I want hip hop 100.9, I have to physically turn the radio dial to a higher frequency to get this new result. So with this stuff, it's what do I want? Oh, I want to lose 30 pounds. That's a much higher result than where you're at right now. Cool. Well, you can't stay low level you and get higher level you results. So instead of saying, how do I get? It's who do I have to become who gets? So with that, who do you have to become who loses 30 pounds? You have to become someone who's consistent. You have to become someone who has delayed gratification. You have to become someone who does this inner work because to fix your relationship with food and sabotaging patterns. These are character traits. You cannot change your personal reality without changing your personality because it's changing who you are. If you're into like little memorable sayings, that's a really good one, is to change your personal reality. You have to change your personality
Mm.
because your current personality of saying, fuck it, start over Monday, binge eating, hide your emotions with food, having a bad relationship with food, these things, that's what's got you where you're at now. Again, no shame, no judgment, no hate. But if you say, I want these higher level results, I want to lose 30 pounds, whatever, you have to become this new version of you. So what do I want to lose, let's say 30 pounds? Who do I have to become who gets that? What version do I have to become who loses 30 pounds? And then now the hardest part, you have to align all of your actions with that version. So when you want to quit, what would they do? What would that higher self do? Do that. Well, I know what to do, but I don't want to do it. Okay, what would the higher self do? They would show up when they're not motivated. Oh, I've had a bad day and I want to hide my emotions with food. What would they do? The higher self that's got your results. They would probably journal or breathe or go on a walk or whatever, feel their feelings separately from food. Exactly. That's the hardest part because your actions are on autopilot with who you are now, with your current old beliefs. So, this is why it's the hardest part to rewrite your mindset, your belief systems, and your results. You have to align your new actions with this new version of yourself. And then you are essentially walking into your new reality. But it's going to feel off because this is who you think you are now. But that's the problem. If you think this is who you are, you're going to subconsciously keep doing these not so great habits and not so great character traits. You have to realize, oh, these patterns, these belief systems, these coping mechanisms, these whatever have gotten me to where I'm at now. Loved it. Awesome. Cool. But it's time for me to change and level up. I've got to become a new version of me. It's like a kid going from third grade to fourth grade. They got to let go of third grade stuff and step into fourth grade them, or junior high to high school. Well, you have to be a little bit more serious. You have to take a little bit more classes. You're going to level up the classes you're taking. You're going to be stretched a little bit more. It's no different, but you're just going from one level to the next, to the next, to the next.
I love that saying, if you want a new reality, you need to take on a new identity. Or sorry, how did that go?
So to change your personal reality, you need to change your personality. I stole it
Ah,
from
yes.
a guy named Dr. Joe Dispenza. So
Oh yes, oh, I love his mindset work and his
yeah,
book as well. Very, very cool guy. But yeah, so I mean that all makes complete sense with regards to the identity change. Nonetheless, I'm curious if you also see that often. So sometimes we have a client who is really motivated to change and they understand all that, they try to do all the work, and then they might say, it's so hard, my partner keeps quote unquote pulling me down, or like they specifically bring me home pizza, even though I said I'm trying to eat better, or like their environment, their best friends every Friday when they meet up and they're starting to say, oh, you're no fun anymore, you're changing, and they mean it in a negative way. So do you find that often also that people really encounter a lot of resistance from their environment?
for sure. I mean, there's a level of resistance is required no matter what. There are ways you can handle it. Like if your partner keeps bringing you home, let's say pizza, um, I would say number one, it sounds like your plan is too rigid. Where if you can't enjoy pizza with your partner, you're on the wrong plan. But like, let's say there's actually consistent issues happening. Well, what would this higher level version of you do? They would probably have an adult conversation with your partner because most people, not all, unfortunately, but most people's partner isn't trying to be malicious. I've actually come across people who are. I've had clients who their husbands are trying to actually quite literally trip them up, and that's a conversation for couples therapy. But most people's partners are either don't understand it, don't get it, and at bare minimum are not trying to be malicious, which means you need to do the one thing that most people want to avoid doing, which is having a healthy conversation and communicate. That's a whole nother subject for itself. But so depending on the situation, having healthy communication with what's going on, how you're feeling, and expressing your needs to the individuals. Even like I've even seen it with like friend circles. Like let's say it's like, oh, you've changed and da 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 da. It may come across as malicious, but there's even times where like, well, have you actually sat down and talked with those friend circles? Like, hey, look, I'm actually not happy the way I am. I can't. I hate the way I look in the mirror. I literally can't play with my grandkids or my kids on the floor, and I'm trying to change my life. And the words you're saying actually do bother me. So if this is an issue, I may need to step away. But I don't think the way you're meaning it like that. But I want you to know that this actually does bother me because I'm actually trying to change my life here. But I'm trying to also have a relationship with you. Like if any good friend would go, "Oh, I'm sorry, I was just joking. I didn't mean anything of it." And if that person's like, "Well, quit being a bitch. You're being a," then they're not your friend, like plain and simple. But most of these environmental issues around people can either be fixed by having actual hard and good communication. And if the situation is incapable of it, then that person's probably not a very good human. They weren't your friend or they're a not so great partner. Those kind of things.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point in the sense of just sometimes we feel so self-conscious about like speaking about it. And it's also in how we speak about it, because some people might say, "Oh, I have to lose that weight," or I went on that diet," and all that sounds really negative. But if you just say like, I want to focus on my health, or I want to feel better by eating these and those foods, sometimes you might even get friends or family that would like to join in or that are motivated and
Sure.
inspired by that. I do think sometimes when it comes from our partner, like more like romantic partners or so, um, sometimes the subconscious pulling someone down is also associated with a fear of losing that
Hmm.
person. Because of course, yes, as you said, they are changing their identity. They're
Sure.
literally becoming a new person. So maybe subconsciously they're feeling like I'm no longer good enough. I'm gonna lose that
Sure.
person.
Sure, it's definitely a double-edged sword there, but there's also times where like an uncommon or a very common unfortunate stereotype is one person in the household wants to go on a diet or start to lose weight, so they're now forcing and expecting everyone in the household to do that. Where then it's like, well, my husband's not supportive of me or my wife's not supportive of me. Well, is it that they're not supportive, or are we trying to force your goals onto them? Like imagine like let's say let's just not trying to make anyone upset. Let's say it's a wife upset that the husband's not supportive. Well, what if he all of a sudden loves jujitsu like I do? And he's like, I want you to come to jujitsu with me. I want you to put on the big uniform. I want you to roll around with these sweaty, nasty guys and and come to jujitsu for 3 hours a day, 2 or 3 days a week with me. And then if the wife's like, nah, it's not my thing. I'm good not going. But then he can go, oh, she's not supportive. And again, I'm not trying to like point fingers by any means. But at the end of the day, no matter anyone's situation, it's your journey. It would be nice if the husband was on board or the wife was on board, but it's not their journey. So just because we're changing doesn't mean we can't be so gung ho to be like they have to change because like any good leadership role, you're going to have to lead from the front for a while. Then over time, the surroundings will start to lead or will start to follow suit, I should say. So a lot of it is there's a lot of on both sides of the fence of blame being placed like, oh, they're not supportive. And sometimes they're not, or it just might not be their cup of tea, or the fashion, the diet preference, the workout schedule may not be their cup of tea. But again, it would be cool if they're on board. But at the end of the day, each of us are in charge of what we put in our mouths. Each of us are in charge of our own autonomy. Each of us are in charge of our own goals in life and actions. Because if we have to have the other person to be like, no, they have to be in this with me 110%, I would call that codependency, right? Like it's one of those things. So, and if you are trying to influence your household, the number one way to do it is get you good without pressure, without pushing them. And eventually they will come around when they see your success and they see you living in this new truth of yours and your happiness. Then they might start to get curious. I've seen that happen a million times, but trying to force them to come on this journey with you, it's not their journey yet. So that's kind of my thoughts on that.
Yeah, I love it. And again, I love your metaphors, Jared, with like the comparison to jiu-jitsu and so on. I think it just again paints a very clear picture. And for anyone listening, I really highly recommend going and checking out Jared's Instagram as well, because you have such a great way of simplifying things and just demonstrating things from a loving perspective as well. But yeah, and I'm curious in regards to your podcast, what are some of the most important topics that you speak about on there, or some of the things that have like resonated the most with listeners and also your clients that you have spoken about on there?
The things that usually hit home the most for people are a few different things. One, all the inner game related stuff. It's anything that I could classify as inner game. And to be honest, my podcast is called Dieting from the Inside Out. So it's pretty exclusively all about the inner game. The big things, though, that I've noticed that people, it's funny, some of the stuff that has been getting a little bit more traction than more than I thought it would be is some of like I've been open up about some of the weird inner game stuff I do personally, like some of the mindset strategies that I do or journal prompts and things like this. But whenever I'm teaching about like specific strategies on do this to fix your relationship with food, do this to stop self-sabotage, those more tactical specifics around what to do, excuse me, usually do little bit better. Or completely changing belief systems. Like most people, like let's say I had one that popped off. It was along the lines of like how to even it was actually a more surface level episode, like how to calculate your calories without all the BS and crazy stuff. But I talked about it from the lens of like, hey, here's what we have to unlearn. These belief systems that we have to get rid of. Like, just because you're a shorter female doesn't mean your calories are inherently lower, or the goal is to eat as much as possible while losing. Like, it's basically a lot of times I'll use these more surface level subjects to talk about how the inner game applies to it. But the biggest thing is getting a little more strategic on how to fix the inner game, how to fix your relationship with food, how to go through this transformational journey, like fixing your inner game, and then how to sustainably lose the weight and then keep it off. All of those kind of things are usually what does really well. Either that or whenever I do interview someone around, like I have a tendency to interview clients because like we all see like before and after pictures or highlight reels, and those are inspiring, they're cool, but they're not as relatable. So a lot of times what I'll do is I will take a client and get the client on my show, and I'll actually interview them about the highs, the lows, the struggles, their journey. And it's just not like, oh, buy my coaching. It's literally like, tell me about your, like, how this played out for you. What were the strategies that resonated most? What helped you the most? And then I get a lot of feedback on those because most people go, oh, I thought I was the only one that struggled with that. Not every single one of these people. So
Yeah, I totally get that. So I get that question very often from clients where they're like, "Oh, am I the only one who is struggling with XYZ?" So just it makes it more relatable. That's a
yeah,
wonderful idea. Just to clarify, when you say the inner game, for anyone listening, like what exactly do you mean by that? Is that like pertaining to our thoughts, to our how we talk to ourselves? Like, could
sure.
you expand?
So if I were to simplify like what the inner game is, it's all of the mental, emotional, and subconscious parts of you. Right. So that would mean belief systems. This would mean subconscious sabotage patterns, maybe your relationship with food. Usually, anytime I relate it to that, it's the deeper, more as I don't even like to say this, but like the darker parts of you that are not just surface level, eat less, move more, work harder. I use it in conjunction. I say it like outer work without inner work doesn't work. Right. Like outer work, fitness, nutrition, calorie tracking, training. Without inner work, your relationship with food, your relationship with yourself, your belief systems, your subconscious patterns, it without the both of those, or without the inner game, none of those work. So
Okay, cool. Thank you. And I'm just out of own personal curiosity because I also like journaling and that kind of stuff, like meditating and so on. You mentioned some specific strategies there when it comes to
mhm.
journaling. What would that be?
So it depends on what I'm working with. So like there's stuff I'll have clients do, but then there's some like really weird shit that I'll do. I actually did a whole podcast on this where I like went crazy in depth on it. So the one of the first journal things that I have clients do is start using that as a tool to hold space for our emotions, because just like you can't do a load of laundry without creating dryer lint, well, you can't go through a day in the life of you without creating mental and emotional lint. We're supposed to have these emotions and these thoughts and all these things. The problem is we try to either fix them or suppress them, or just like escape from them, whereas we just need to feel them. Feeling is healing. It's just like imagining to go to the bathroom, but you're scared to go to the bathroom. Like, no, you actually just need to go to the toilet and let nature, what's in, come out. Like it's the same thing with your emotions. If you're feeling sadness, you need to hold space and actually be with the sadness and allow yourself to feel it so it comes through you and it goes away. Just like going to the bathroom. So usually that's that's kind of an out there thought for a lot of people that's always escaped from their emotions. So one of the first things I'll have clients do, and I still do this myself, is journal. Do what I call a brain or an emotional dump, where you're just what like your only prompt is what do I feel? And then you just start writing like you're talking to a friend until you have nothing else to say. And you may find yourself 4 or 5 pages later. But if that's your now go-to coping strategy, whenever you feel some internal stuff, like you feel sad, worried, lonely, hopeless, anxious, depressed, whatever, like you're going to be making better decisions, and you're going to be pausing and allowing those things to be here in almost like a motherly therapeutic like way versus just like, no, let's go act like this doesn't exist and be productive. Some of the stuff that I do is more along the lines also of like there's different gratitude stuff I'll do. There's different like in the world of like goal setting and like walking through like future self journaling, inner child journaling. There's this like reverse inner child thing that I'll do, which is kind of weird. There's all sorts of stuff like that that I'll do that seem to help. So
That's awesome. And yeah, I once again you had me laughing with your daily accumulation of the lint metaphor there. But it makes complete sense. And I mean
yeah,
I when I don't I'm not as consistent with my journaling as I am with my meditation, but if I don't do my meditation, I truly feel like something is lacking. And we have just gone
yeah,
through a 75-day challenge, me and some clients and so on. And that challenge literally just included 3 minutes of stillness per day. And that
yep,
was the hardest component because the other two components of the challenge were to track your food and to move daily. And so,
mm-hmm,
yeah, anyway, everybody said that the stillness part was the hardest. But for me, the true breakthrough was maybe after 40 days or so, where people started to comment in the group, I'm craving these 3 minutes of stillness. And for me, it seems
mm-hmm,
like the journaling is just a similar way to, well, or to process and to get things
right,
on paper as well, or to get things out. And I think like our language is so limited in the sense of
mm-hmm,
expressing how we're feeling. We say, oh, I'm stressed or I'm anxious. So often when you actually think about it or when you journal about it, you're like, oh no, hang on. I was actually worried because of finances, because of that, and
Right.
that made me X, but I just said I'm stressed or like,
Hmm.
so I really like that.
Yeah, they're all tools for for a different job. To be honest, I actually want to get people to the point of meditation, but most people are really resistant to it. So I actually use journaling to be the gateway to meditation. Because the thing is with like calorie tracking, journaling, all these things, what they have in common is you're doing something versus meditation, you're being, which a lot of people can't. They're like, well, how do I be? I'm like, you're trying to intellectualize an act and just be in a state of being and present of not doing anything. Like, how do you do not doing anything? Like that's you know what I'm saying. But most people again, what they, is from the moment they wake up, they're in do mode. Actually they're in reactivity mode and distraction. So when you actually go to sit and meditate, it's and you just listen to silence and be with what comes up and not do anything with it. It's why breakthroughs happen. A mentor of mine actually, I was at like almost a week long like very spiritual meditation or like this retreat kind of thing before like the conference and the day started, which was 9 to 5, and it was crazy meditation and spiritual inner game stuff. He had us get up an hour early to meditate for an hour before the event. So I would literally, I jokingly said I would wake up to sleep again, or I would wake up to just sit in silence. Like, so we would wake up, I would wake up, get caffeine so I didn't fall back asleep, and I would sit in with my eyes closed in silence on the bed for the next hour before we went to this meditation conference thing. But again, I had breakthroughs. It's because that's where there's power in pausing, and that's where the magic happens because you can hear things now. Everyone wants a breakthrough, but won't sit in silence to hear what that breakthrough is. So,
It's so true. And yeah, I think another thing that came up often was when people were like, oh, it's not really getting any easier. And I'm like, well, it's not necessarily supposed to get easier. Like you're still struggling to go to the gym after 10 years time, or, like it's still supposed to be hard. And that is where the breakthrough happens when we
yep.
lean into that resistance. I actually called it a 3-minute timeout as opposed to
Mm,
meditation or stillness, because
yeah.
again, people have resistance even just towards that word. And they're like, oh, I tried meditating. I didn't
Yep.
like it or didn't do anything for me or whatever. So I just said 3-minute
It's an
timeout.
expectation.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
I always tell people you have to earn the right for it to be a Zen experience. Like you have to be like, it's almost like think about someone who's never worked out. It's going to be a while until they're not like sore or tired or whatever, until it's becoming your very regular thing. Meditation is no different. It's going to be a minute before you've earned the right for it to be a Zen experience. You got like it's a gross analogy, but imagine not having gone to the bathroom for like 30 years. And then you're like, I want it to be a normal, I want to be regular. Like, no, you're going to have a lot of quite literal shit to work through. And then once you get on the other side of all that, then it will be a normal going to the bathroom experience. But if it was possible mentally and emotionally, most people have done the equivalent of not gone to the bathroom for decades. And then they're like, I'm going to go to the bathroom. Why is it a mess? Why is there all this crazy stuff going on? But it's how people are at mentally and emotionally.
Absolutely. Well, Jared, I want to make sure I'm respecting your time. So thank you so much for
Of
everything you
course.
shared with us today. And I'm actually going to check out that podcast episode that you mentioned on journaling, and I'll
Awesome.
put it in the show notes for everyone
Sweet.
listening as well as of course all your handles and so on. So just truly thank you so much for sharing your time.
I appreciate it. Thanks for having me. It's been a blast.